So I'm just going to recap here quickly the demand analysis. Again, good day, everyone. I hope you all were able to actually go through the whole YouTube video from last week and the week before that. But in this class, we're just going to continue, okay? We stopped after demand last week, and I was just asking you guys, well, just now about demand and price. And we say that whatever effect price have, whether it be an increase in price or decrease in price of something, demand will not be directly affected. We see how there's an indirect relationship between price and demand. What do I mean by an indirect relationship? It's also called an inverse relationship. It means that whenever price increase for something, you will simply either decrease your demand for that good, or you simply will just stop demanding the good. Another example is if price decrease. If price decrease, and I know I was giving you all the example with food and what would happen if doubles price decrease, obviously there will be more demand for the item. So whenever price decrease for a good or even a service, there is going to be an increase in demand for that same good or service at that particular point in time. So that's what we would have looked at last week. In addition to, we had looked at the law of demand, which we just summarized there, where the higher the price of a good, the less the product. All right, you guys are still there, and I don't know what just happened. My laptop just froze. You're still there, right? You're hearing me clearly? Just want to make sure. I know with the rain and everything, the internet may not be as strong, but just making sure you all are hearing me okay, and you all are seeing my slides. Excellent. So we can continue. So with demand and price, we say that with the law of demand, the higher the price of a good or service, the less we will consume that good or service. And as the price of these goods fall, the more we will demand those goods and services. So we spoke about the whole law of demand. So I hope that corrects you guys. You all are actually now made aware of what will happen if price increase versus when price decrease, and how would it affect demand. So that being said, if I have to ask you guys to illustrate this, illustrate how a demand curve will look like. Illustrate how will it look. Would it be a horizontal curve? Would it be a vertical curve? Would it be an upward sloping curve, or would it be a downward sloping curve? So how do we represent a demand curve? How would we illustrate it? Would it be an upward, downward, horizontal, vertical curve? Very good, Jeremiah. It is a downward sloping curve, which we did last week. And it slopes downward from left to right. It slopes downward from left to right. We are seeing that here in this diagram. And why it slopes downward is because of that inverse or indirect relationship, which means as the price goes up, so let's say at $2, you were demanding $8. But let's say the price goes up to $6. How much would we demand? Only $4. You're seeing that? For a price of $2, you're demanding $8 of whatever you are purchasing. But if price goes up to $8, you are going to demand just 2 of that item. So we can actually understand why the slope is downward sloping. The demand curve is downward sloping, and we can see that with the prices and the quantities. So that's why I told you all in exam, your diagrams will help you answer your questions. Economics is all about diagrams. You illustrate your diagrams, even though the examiners haven't even asked you to. You illustrating it will guide you to know how to answer your question. You can actually see how the diagram looks like. Okay. We went on to say last week that with the demand curve, price is the only factor that will cause movement along the demand curve. And I know I was basically preaching that last week over and over with regards to price being that only factor that causes movements along the demand curve. And we understand what the downward and upward movements are. If price decrease, so let's say it was originally at P1. P1 giving us Q1 goods. So the price of 20, we're getting 10. All right. But if price decrease from $20 to, let's say, $10, right? It goes down to $10. We could probably demand 40 goods here. So we see that when price decrease, our demand will increase, and there will be a downward movement along the demand curve. But we also have the opposites. If price increase, let's say price was originally here at $5, giving us a quantity of, we can demand 10. But if price moved from $5 to, let's say, $10, we might end up demanding about just 2 items. So when price increase, our quantity demanded will decrease, and therefore we will have an upward movement along the demand curve. So again, just summarizing those 2 points, only price causes movement along the demand curve. It can either cause a downward movement, or it can cause an upward movement. And I hope you all understand now this whole concept of price and demand. Again, price is the only factor. That cause these movements. But there are other non-price factors, and I put the prefix in front of the price, non-price factors that would also affect demand. Demand will also be affected if your income decreased. Your income decreased. Would you demand more goods and services? No, you will be demanding less. If you realize that between butter and margarine, let's say you prefer to buy butter, but you notice that butter price increase, you might end up switching your expenditure to buy more of something else, probably margarine. That will cause a shift of that substitute, because you all know butter and margarine is like substitutes, right? If you can't afford butter, you'll switch to margarine. I hope you all know this. I'm just talking from just, observing what you see in the grocery, things that are of close substitutes. You would have butter and margarine. What else you can use if you realize that something is that has changed its price? You might end up switching to something else. Okay, so a good classic example, if the price of butter increase, you might end up switching to just margarine. There are also complementary goods as well, which I did not mention last week to you guys, that could also cause the shift of the demand curve. So I say the word complementary goods. So if you all have a notebook, which not if, since you all have a notebook in front of you guys, I hope you're writing some notes down, not exactly what I'm saying, but just jot down these things. We coming across a new term, complementary goods. Complementary goods are basically goods that are in joint demand. That is, they go hand in hand. So they go hand in hand, all right? So I'm saying we cannot buy something and not buy something else, in other words. So let's say you buy, the oil, remember those old time cameras, where you always have to put the tape in, see when you take the picture, whatever, tape will come out, or you might actually go and get it developed at a photo place. Or you remember that? Or you remember those days where we had that? So cameras and films, that's a basic example, but I know all are going to come with some better examples here. So I just gave the old time one because, Miss not only old, but Miss still have her old time camera, right? So with all, I cannot say I'm going to buy a camera and, oh shucks, I have no films. I have nothing to, when I take the picture, nothing will come out. So I have to buy the films too. Another thing, I bought a car. You think I could just say, hey, I want a car and go put gas in the car? That's madness, right? Unless I'm doing something illegal, right? You have to have, when you have your car, you have to put your gas. Car and gas are complementary goods. Come on, you'll give me some examples. I see in cornflakes and milk, yes. You can't buy cornflakes and not buy milk, right? Hot dogs and hot dog buns. Ah, Shaniqua, I like that one. When you come with food, I go in towards that. So hot dogs and hot dog buns. PB&J, car and tires. Okay, I just reading all the chat here, right? So these are good examples. Somebody saying socks and shoes. So socks and shoes. I remember that one. I feel you were related to one of my past students. Socks and shoes. You can't buy shoes without socks. I remember another example could be you can't buy a toothbrush without a toothpaste. Yeah, that was one thing I remembered back in the days. Yeah, and to this day, you're still rolling with it. You buy a toothbrush, you had to buy a toothpaste too. Somebody saying milk and Milo. Yes, all of those are complementary goods. So you'll have an idea. So you see, I'm sticking with this diagram. Huh? I haven't gone to any other diagrams but this diagram because what we are talking about here will only affect this diagram. So because these are goods that are in joint demand. So if the price of, let's say, let me give camera and film. We'll just go back to that for a second. If the price of the camera increase, so I want to go and purchase a new camera, but I notice that because I have to spend so much more money for this camera, I might say, you know what, I might really may have to do without it, because when I buy this camera, I'll have to buy the films, and the films might also be a high cost as well. I have a car, I want to change the tires, or you want to buy a new car, you want to change the tires, and you notice that car price increasing. Chances are you might say, you know what, best I go for a bike instead, yes, or take a taxi, right? If the price of bread increase, I see, Vivek saying bread and cheese, if bread price increase, would you decrease your purchase of cheese? We don't know if some people might actually do that. So think of it like when the price of something increase, you might end up decreasing your demand for that other item. That is a complementary good. All right. So we have substitutes with butter and margarine. If the price of butter increase, we consumers kind of smart, we will just go to something else. We would switch our expenditure to probably margarine, right? So these are some good examples that you all will definitely remember for the exam when you have to write it. So in addition to what we just spoke about, these are other factors that would also shift that demand curve. So we just spoke about the income of consumers, substitutes and complements. Let me look at some more. We have taste and preference, seasonal factors. During the winter time, would you see, well, obviously you all know Trinidad, Caribbean countries do not experience winter time. But if you're looking at the states, during winter time, would you see them selling more bathing suits, or would you see them selling more winter clothing? Would you see consumers purchasing bathing suits at that time or more winter clothing? You will see, yes, those winter clothing, right? So seasonal factors will also shift that demand curve because we are demanding more winter clothing, more boots, more scarves, those kind of things. We will have to definitely increase our demand for those goods as our taste and preference. If there's more advertising being done on the good, all right? So you all may actually increase your expenditure on that particular good. Samsung versus Apple phone. But I won't get into that because I know that's a big uproar when it comes on to, when I talk to, I'm an Android person. I do not like, I cannot use an Apple phone. Apple phones are just so confusing. They will say, nah, miss, nah, the Apple phone is way better, But I would argue and say because of my Samsung phone, because it keeps increasing with the series and all the different upgraded series, it's user friendly, right? Compared to the Apple phone. I don't know. I've tried it and I failed miserably using an Apple phone. All right, so Samsung all the way. Yes, Larry. You're my favorite so far. All right, so when there's more advertising being done, which on the television or news, when you see more advertisements of different goods keep being promoted, whether it be on the news or on advertisements, on billboards, on newspapers, you may gravitate towards it more. All right. So that's why advertising would also shift that demand curve outward. So we know many factors. So it will either shift it outwards or inwards. Outwards mean increase, inwards mean decrease. Demand is going down when it goes inwards. Demand is going up or increasing when it shifts outwards. So you'll see I didn't talk about anything about price here. I don't care what price it is. We're not caring about price because we've seen price staying the same. Price is constant, price not moving. Only price factors, which we looked at just now, will cause the upward or downward movement. But because we're looking at non-price factors, like what we just spoke of, it will only cause these shifts. I hope you all are making note. These are some hints for that little assessment next week. Please God, right, you guys? Next week will be the last class. I know time flying, but you're going to get a little assessment from me next week. It will be fun. I want to get your feedback on how this whole summer program was for you guys, what you all would have learned through demand and supply analysis. So this is going in depth here now with the demand curve. We're seeing an outward shift from D to D1, being mindful that I have my axes labeled. I have the heading, I have my origin, I have the names of my curves. It is shifting outwards. means there's an increase in demand, and it shifts inwards, which means that there is a decrease in demand. So that's our 30 minutes of class already. Our 30 minutes of class just summarized what we did last week, which was the demand analysis. Do you all have any questions before we move on? I'm going to take whatever questions you all may have through the chat. And if not, we're moving on to the supply analysis. I hope we'll be able to do some readings on it. The law of supply is what we will start off with. So we're moving our attention from demand and we're looking at the supply side. So when we say that supply, the law of supply states, other things are equal, the quantity supplied of a good rises when the price of a good rises. So what does that mean? As the price of something increases, supply would also increase. If the price of something decreases, supply will decrease. So we can safely say that while demand had an inverse relationship with price, supply have a direct relationship with price. Right? So you all heard that, right? So price and supply, they have a direct relationship. All right, so moving on. How does it look? Okay, I'm just going to repeat for those who are asking. So I'm just repeating for those who were asking to just kind of go over what I just said about the law of supply. Basically, price and supply have a direct relationship. It's also called a positive relationship. If the supply is increased, price will increase. And subsequently, if supply decreases, price will decrease. So if supply decreases, price will decrease. And you can write, you'll have to say the word, a word for word note in your book. You draw your arrows. Supply increase. So you put supply and show upward arrow. Then you're leading it to when supply increase, price will increase. And if supply decrease, price will automatically decrease. And we can actually see it from this diagram over here. So if the price of pizza, 50 cents, or let me say $1.50. $1.50, and we are getting 8 slices. All right. If the price goes up to $2.50, suppliers will have to increase their supply to 14 slices of pizza. Right? So yes, we are seeing something completely opposite from the demand analysis. Demand analysis is not like this. It is completely opposite. We know the demand curve is firstly downward sloping. This supply curve, we're seeing it upward sloping because the price and supply have a direct relationship. Price and supply have a direct relationship. If the price increase, supply will increase. If price decrease, supply will also decrease. So are you all seeing that? Just by a little thumbs up. I know you all were asking some questions in the chat. Are you all okay with this here? Okay, great. So we can move on. So just for you all to revise this after. You all are not to ever cram. This is something that is so much like common sense. You all will understand eventually. When you're doing your diagrams, you all will be able to explain your diagrams in the exam. So let me talk about the supply curve. So the supply curve is a graphical representation of the correlation between the cost of a good or service and the quantity supplied for a given period. So in other words, whenever we are talking of supply, it is the quantity of a good offered for sale at a particular point in time. So you can even write that as a definition for what supply is. Because we have a supply curve definition, but it's giving you a definition of supply. So I'm just repeating. Supply can be defined as a quantity of good offered for sale at a particular price at a point in time. Whatever good that is offered for sale, we have the price for that good. But the supply curve, we're talking about the cost of a good or service and the quantity supplied for that good or service. So we're going to see what that basically means. Quantity supplied, which is the amount of a good or services that sellers are willing to sell at a specific price. Right? So when the price, talking about price here, price alone will cause the movements along the supply curve. Right? But non-price factors will cause the supply curve to shift. So we have the first point, price causes movement along the supply curve, the SC, and non-price factors will cause shifts of the supply curve. So the diagram showing movements along the supply curve. Well, when price increase, let's say from P1 to P2, supply will increase and therefore there will be an upward movement along the supply curve. So only price will cause the movement along the supply curve. And this is only because of price. We can also say there's an extension of the supply curve. It's moving away from the origin. When price increase, supply will increase, which will cause an upward movement along the supply curve. But if the opposite applies, where price decrease, there's going to be a decrease in supply, which would cause a downward movement along the supply curve. It is also called a contraction of the supply curve. Do you all understand? Just take a minute and just understand those two factors. So we are continuing to now the non-price factors here now. We just look at the price factors. Now we're looking at the non-price factors that will cause the supply curve to shift, whether it be inwards or outwards. So these factors are the price of other commodities, availability of raw materials, change in technology, costs of the factors of production, taxes and subsidies, conditions outside the control of man. So these non-price factors, we can also say that They're also called the conditions of supply, whereby it will cause the supply curve to only shift inwards or outwards. And the same concept if there are changes in technology. Think of that. Think of this scenario. If technology advances, we get rid of all the outdated, obsolete technology and we advance our technology here in Trinidad. Do you think more goods can be produced or less goods will be produced? That must seem a common sense students here. I know all you will say it will increase, right? And you all are correct. When technology advances, more goods can be produced. Availability of raw materials based on what we have in the economy. If our raw materials, let's say, decreases or we don't have any, chances are that we may have to supply more goods to try to accommodate what people do not have. And that was a response that I had now given to one of the students here in the chat, which is an excellent question that he asked, is if scarcity can cause a supply curve to increase, meaning it will shift outwards. So think of it. Analyze it in your heads. If you're within this economy and you notice that, all right, there's not much flour price increasing, all these different things increasing. There was a time, long time ago, where the supply of flour was so short. The supply of it was just not enough to accommodate the demand for different vendors and whatnot. You know what they had to do? Not only increase the prices, but try to increase the supply for this particular raw material. And we could actually say, yes, Larry, the whole pandemic created this whole, not only the pandemic, but even previously, factors do cause the supply curve to either increase or decrease. If you increase your technology, you make it more advanced. Instead of someone needing flour and then put it in the oven and, okay, let me don't go there. I don't even know how to bake a bread. We don't say that. I'm going to just say, because we have technology now within this economy that will allow for mass production to take place, we can definitely see this happening. Sorry, not this one. This happening. There will be an outward shift in the supply curve. So when we see an outward shift in the supply curve, it means that more supply can be generated within the economy. So the outward shift is positive. It means that more can be supplied at each price level. Price doesn't change, it's constant, but the supply will increase. However, this diagram is illustrating a decrease in supply. Simply, I mean, you guys, this is so very common sense. You could actually understand why, when there's not enough technology to produce more goods and services, it moved from this supply curve, S1, and it shifted inwards to S3. An inward shift of the curve means that producers cannot supply as much at each price level. When there's a decrease in supply, the supply curve will shift inwards. When there's an increase in supply, it will shift outwards. And that is actually the end of the demand and supply analysis. There's more to it, but at this point, the basic understanding you all should be able to absorb it from in this lesson. If you all have any questions, please do not hesitate. There's no such thing as a stupid question. You all can message in the chat. Let me know what your thoughts are. I can correct it. I can try to make sense out of it if you have any concerns at this point. All right, so I hope that answered those questions that were asked to me. We are looking at now our lesson 3, which is a continuation of yes, demand and supply, but we are going a little bit more in depth here now. And this part, it's going to be very short. This will take us to the balance of the class. We're looking at the market forces. We are looking at equilibrium and disequilibrium. If you all ever came across it before, then you all we have an idea what we are looking at. For those who are new to it, just hearing the term equilibrium, what's coming to your minds when you hear the word equilibrium? All the maths students, and all they're doing maths as well. Equal, yes. It's something equaling, balance, yes. Very good. And I'll give all you a hint. It's dealing with demand and supply. Would you say demand is more than supply? Supply is more than demand? Demand is equal to supply? You will say yes. Demand is equal to supply. So equilibrium in this case is the price at which the number of products businesses are willing to supply equals the amounts of products consumers are willing to buy at a specific price. Equilibrium is also said to be a situation of rest. In other words, demand is equal to supply. Very simple, right? No rocket science here. The next part is to illustrate it. Can you all illustrate what we just spoke of, what we just now see here on this slide? I mean, demand is equal to supply. How would you do that? How would you draw this diagram? Well, you know, everything in economics is about diagram, graphical representation of what we speak of. So how would you think this would look? Yes. Basically, it will have this diagram. The demand curve cutting the supply curve. Where it meets is our equilibrium. So let me just give you all some pointers on this diagram here. So first of all, when you are drawing this diagram, you know, I know we don't have the option of physical class, but when we start in September, I will be seeing your diagrams. I'm going to make sure that I see your diagrams to ensure that you all are drawing it legibly. It's large enough, no chunky, tiny diagrams. I like big diagrams. It mustn't take up your whole book, but at least half your book. All right, at least half. You want to have the price and your quality axes labeled. You want to have your origin. You want to also have your supply curve correctly, showing an upward curve. And we want to have the demand curve correctly showing it to be a downward curve. Wherever it meets, it's going to cut over here and it's going to come down to the quantity. So you're going to be cutting by the price and cutting by the quantity. What this basically means is that whatever this center amount is, that will give us our equilibrium price. And when it comes down to your quantity, that would be our equilibrium quantity. Equilibrium is in this area here, this middle area region. This will give us our equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. And I have my diagram labeled. A simple diagram that is worth a lot in the exam. So the determination of the equilibrium price and quantity. Well, you all saw how I was able to determine my equilibrium price and my equilibrium quantity. The equilibrium price in a market is that price at which all other prices for the same commodity tends to settle. I also saw one of my students in the chat here message the same tend to settle. Very good. It is that price at which the demand curve cuts the supply, like what we just saw in the previous diagram. So you can safely say, you guys, QD equals QS. Quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. But you think we could always achieve that? You think we could always be equal? What do you all think? You think we would always have equilibrium within an economy? No, we won't. We want it. We want to have equality throughout, yes. But unfortunately, reality says otherwise. So we do not always achieve equilibrium in the market. Price can either be above the equilibrium price can be below the equilibrium price. That will definitely not allow us to achieve equilibrium. All right, so once you all could actually know that, we can see what I basically mean by that. Let us see here. So we have, again, market equilibrium. Equilibrium is in this center region. Our equilibrium price is at $15 and our equilibrium quantity, whatever it may be, is QX. But in this diagram, it's showing that my price went up to $20. So I'm not operating at equilibrium. I'm operating above equilibrium. So we do not always operate at equilibrium. So according to this diagram, what is going to be achieved is something called a glut, as GLOT, or a surplus in the market. And this here will cause the price to end up falling because there's so much in the economy right now because price went up. Because price went up, there's a surplus. But you might be asking yourself, but how we get a surplus here? Well, I like to show how I was able to arrive at this answer. So I'm just going to sketch something really fast for you guys. Please excuse my diagram. It may not be straight, it may not be perfect, but I just want to just show you all how is it that we got a glut or surplus when price goes up, because we know when price go up, we will demand less. But let me just see what happening here. In the exam, we don't know, so we draw diagrams. So I'm just gonna simply draw normal diagram. I'm gonna show my supply curve and my demand curve. I'm going to, this is the steps you all are doing to draw this kind of diagram for the exam, right? Because you always see a diagram in front of you and I'll be like, well, how are we drawing that? I'm just giving you all a little sketch of how to really do it in the exam. Just quickly, right? So price is on this axis here. And we have quantity in the horizontal axis. Always remember to put in your 0. We don't want to lose any marks for that. What is the name of this curve? This is my supply curve, and my downward curve is my demand curve. At this point, I'm just going to use a star, little dot right here, illustrating equilibrium. And at this point, we have equilibrium. We have equilibrium price, and we have equilibrium quantity. So I'm putting PE, representing equilibrium price. And at this point here, I'm going to put just QE, representing equilibrium quantity. All right, so we get equilibrium. But let's just say equilibrium is not here. Well, it's here, but because price increased, we're not achieving equilibrium. Price went up, let's say, let me give an example. Let me see if I can find it. Right, so price went up from PE to P1. These are the names of my prices, PE, and I went up to P1. So I'm in the exam, and I don't know what's happening here. Am I going to have a glut in the market? Am I going to have a glut or a surplus? Or am I going to get a deficit? We don't know. We just keep drawing it until we get the answer. So let me just assume that price went up. So you're drawing this first diagram. And in slow motion, I'm going to cut a curve first. And we don't know what curve it may be. So let's see. I'm going to keep going until I meet my first diagram. What is the name of this diagram here that I first cut? It is my demand curve. So I'm going to bring down now my light. Sorry, guys, it is not the best diagram, but you're all seeing where my line is coming straight down. And I'm going to have here QD, because at P1, I'm going to have this amount being demanded at QD. But we still have more space to do. We have more to go. So let me continue. So we just cut the first diagram, the first line. Let's continue. What's my second curve I just cut? It is my supply curve. And I'm going to bring this down to get quantity supplied, whatever that supply is. This region here is going to be my surplus. And why would I say it is my surplus? Is because we can see, I'm just going to write it here. Which one is greater? Would you say quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied, or my quantity supplied is greater than my quantity demanded? So look where the origin is, look where the 0 is. Is QD greater than QS, or QS greater than QD? What would you all say? Correct. My quantity demanded, or if you say my quantity supplied, is greater than my quantity demanded. So you have more supply than what you demand. More supply. Think of material, think of more goods in the economy than what you actually demanding. That is definitely going to give us a surplus. So when quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded, we get a surplus. So you're seeing how, let's just say we started off with just drawing a decrease in price, but it would be below equilibrium. And the first curve would have been your supply curve and then the demand curve. So we'll get to that in a bit, but we would see that you will not get a surplus. You will get something totally opposite. Quantity supplied in this example is greater than our quantity demanded. So let me just go back to this. So at any price above this 15, market equilibrium, we see in it here, people will be demanding less. So technically we were correct because you see, you witnessing when you go to the food court in the malls, and you know, I go into food right now because it's the time that I start talking about food, right? So market equilibrium. We go in the food court. We know that, all right, $15 is for some, you know, chicken and pie. But you notice that price went up to $20. So you might start to say, you know what, that might be a little too expensive for me. What I am going to say is that you all should be aware that when in this lovely country of Trinidad, you all know that when at a particular time, let's say 6 o'clock in the evening, what happens to the price of these goods? Would it keep increasing or would it decrease? So there's another question related to this diagram. I'm just asking you all a question that you all notice around you guys. You all should be aware of what's happening around you. So we see that we are operating a little above equilibrium. We have a price increase. People will be demanding less because suppliers trying to get rid of whatever goods that they have in the market, whatever food that is left back in the food court, they want to get rid of it. So they say that, okay, the price increase not really causing them to come purchase the food. So as a result, what food courts will start to do is to decrease the price of the food, say at 6 p.m. And when they keep decreasing the supply, the price of the food, it will reach a price where this whole surplus here, let me just get back this, my entire surplus here will decrease. And as it keeps decreasing, guess where it's going to go back to? It's going to go back to my equilibrium. So as my price increase, consumers don't want to demand much. Quantity demanded will be less. Quantity supply will be more. But because we have so much supply, you're going to throw away all this good food? No. This is a classic example that you will see. People will end up selling goods as well as services at a cheaper price so that consumers will be willing to come and purchase these goods and services. And as they come, because you're decreasing your price, this surplus will disappear. It will disappear and it will go back to equilibrium. Are you all seeing that? This is just one example that I know will help you all understand how, yes, we have a surplus. You might say, oh, that's good. but that could lead to wastage of resources. People don't want it because it's too expensive. What suppliers will have to resort to is decrease the price so that demand will increase and it will get rid of the excess supply that is happening in the markets. All right. And obviously, you all know the opposite will apply if there is a deficit. So a deficit here will occur when our price, our equilibrium price, we have another price below that equilibrium price. So let's say at a price of 15, you all remember how I told you all how to draw it. Refer back to the whiteboard. Use your notebooks. You're showing a decrease in price from $15 to $10. You're drawing it to see which curve am I cutting first. I'm cutting this curve. What is this curve? This is our supply curve. And then what is the next curve we're going to cut? We're cutting the demand curve. So we can say that demand is greater than supply. Demand greater than supply. Why does that sound like our economic problem? I remember our economic problem where we have unlimited wants and needs, unlimited demand. Doesn't this sound like the economic problem that we experience here in this economy? We have more demand, we have more people demanding more goods than what the economy can actually provide for us. This is an example that we are showing here. Our demand is greater than our supply. There is therefore a shortage in the market, which would cause price to increase so that people will be hardly influenced to buy the product. Since demand is greater than the supply, the price will end up increasing. So imagine it keeps going up to meet back the equilibrium price. So at any price below $15, demand will exceed supply. We're seeing it here. Demand 390 is greater than 190. It will increase. The area between that increase is called your deficit or your shortage. Or whenever there are shortages, prices will tend to increase so that people will be hardly influenced to purchase the product. So in conclusion, anything above equilibrium, get a surplus where quantity supply is greater than quantity demanded, right? We get that. But when there's a shortage, we have quantity demanded greater than quantity supply, which will cause that shortage or deficit. And to correct it, you just have to keep increasing your price to get back equilibrium. If there's a surplus, you're going to have to decrease your price to get rid of the surplus. To get rid of your deficit, you're going to increase your price to get rid of the deficit and operate back at equilibrium. You all think you're okay with this so far? All right. So at this point, I want to just encourage you guys, for those who may be lost, especially for those who are new to the subject area, please refer back to the recordings. And if by next week you feel that you are still confused, you all please remind yourself, put a note in your book to ask Miss to just clarify this particular point. She won't go over the entire topic again unless you all really need me to do that. I doubt it, but if you all do, I will do so. But at any point that you all get that confusion, it is to let me know ASAP. Don't wait till the exam and you'll be like, I never really understand this. That's when you are in trouble, not me. I already write my exams. It's all I need to write the exam. You'll need to write your notes so that you all would be able to come to me and I would explain it more in depth. So I hope you're okay with this. It's just a few more notes again to complete just our lesson 3. A few more slides. And it's just basically what is happening at disequilibrium. So disequilibrium is the opposite of equilibrium. We say disequilibrium is where the quantity demanded is not equal to quantity supplied. I mean, that's your common sense answer right there. So when that happens, the government will come in now and intervene in the market. When they come in to intervene in the market, from time to time, they will influence the prices in the market. And you remember last class, which was last night for PUB, when we spoke about command economies, free market economies, mixed economies. Well, somewhat like that, what we looked at last night in POB class, is what we are looking at here, but a little bit more in depth. In that the government, yes, we have a mixed economy in Trinidad here. We are going to have the government intervening if prices are not in accordance to what it's supposed to be. Okay? So when the government intervenes in the effort to control prices, these prices are called flat prices, and it takes 2 forms. You can either have a price floor or a price ceiling. And very simple, think of the price floor as the lower limit on prices set by the government. We spoke of this last night as well. But we are going to extend our knowledge by saying that this price floor, yes, we know it's the lower limit on prices set by the government. This lower limit can either set below the market price, which is below equilibrium, or it can be set above the minimum price, that is set above the market price. At this stage, at this level, CSEC level, this is all you need to note. When we go, well, if you all are considering A-level economics, which is even more enticing than CSEC, I must say, I love the A-levels more because it gives you a greater understanding of what's really happening. You all know where to find me. But with this here at CSEC level, all you need to know at this time, at this point in time, is that the price floor, yes, at the lower limit set on prices by the government, it can either be below the market price or above the market price. And then we have the price ceiling, which is the upper limit set on prices, where prices can either be below the market price, right, or above the market price. This is the upper limit. We're thinking of the ceiling, we're thinking above the upper limit set on prices by the government. So it all depends on what the government wants to achieve in the economy. And if you're journeying into your A-level economics, you all know that when we get into the macroeconomy, you all are going to see some in-depth diagrams of what's happening here. But hey, you all could definitely do your research. You all could Google, how does these diagrams look like? All right. And that basically sums up the end of lesson 3. All right. So if you all have any questions, again, write them down so you all will not forget to ask me them. If you need to ask it to me next week. Next week we have some announcements for class in terms of registration and whatnot. You may get a little pop quiz, a little assessment. It's gonna be a difficult one. And we will just be talking in general what to expect for the new term come September. I really do look forward to it. And please make every effort to attend class next week, please God. All right. So again, have a good night. I'll still be here to answer any questions you all may have. If not, that's it for class. And don't forget to go up on YouTube and go over these notes. It's very important that you all do for all your subject areas, right? Okay, so bye everyone.